So for the audio description, I'm yet another white male who's about 40-ish. I'm actually unusually, though, sat in my office at work as the university is open for business because we are a university. And so I'm one of the rare people, although there's actually nobody else in the office with me. So I've got an entire open plan office to myself. I wear glasses, and at 40 years old, I'm fighting a battle between whether I will go grey first or white, or whether I'll lose all my hair or whether I'll go grey first. And baldness is certainly winning the fight at the moment. So today's talk is on practical methods for assessing whether something is easy to see on mobile. And I'm going to try and do interactive exercises. They may or may not work, but I'm going to try anyway. So for those, please, if you have a QR code reader ready on your phone, that can certainly help with that. But we'll just see how it goes and see what happens. So my slide deck seems to have frozen. Oh, no, we're alive now. Right. So for the first icebreaker exercise, I want you to look at this vision test chart, please. And it's just a really quick exercise to see what happens, and just identify the smallest row that you can read. And so that I can process these, hopefully, type that into the chat window, but type a star first. So if you could type star and then 8, if you'd seen row 8. If you can't see this screen at all, if you have vision impairment issues that you can't see any of the letters at all, please type a star and then 0. Now, the reason why this gets exciting is apparently there's about a 20 seconds delay between me putting this up on screen and you guys actually being able to see it. So there's then going to be a delay between when you can actually type into the feedback screen, then I can actually see that feedback to make some comments on it. So I'm going to try and not have a disappear in a schizophrenic puff of smoke, but I'm giving it a go anyway. So hopefully at some stage you will be able to see this and put in a row number and put that into chat, and maybe later on in the presentation I'll come back to that and see what happens. So that's for this test chart. Just as it is, if you're wearing glasses, keep them on. At whatever distance you are currently at your screen, just stick with it and just put a number in. But now we're going to have a go on a second chart where I've applied Gaussian blurring onto all of the letters. So same exercise again. This time though, please put an ampersand before you put the chat window. So that's a shift and 7 on my keyboard. So if you could see row 3 now, you would type ampersand and then 3. Now, what the Gaussian blurring, in the first chart, you get loads of variability from different screen sizes, different eyesight abilities, and different viewing distances. What I'm hoping we're going to find with this chart is that the Gaussian blurring kind of swamps all of that. And it means it doesn't make much difference how big the letters are or how far away you are from them. And as long as you've got reasonable eyesight, it won't make that much difference anymore, like minor variations in a bit of age-related long-sightedness, not quite wearing the right glasses, that kind of thing. So it's going to be really interesting to see if I do manage to get access to the bits that you type, to see whether to what extent that comes true, and I'll look forward to seeing that. But here's a sort of demo of it. So here's the set of the letters at the size that you first saw them, and you can see which which row number you reckoned you could see. And then underneath that, I've made the letters twice as big. So you can see that it doesn't really make that much difference. And if you move forwards or backwards away from the screen, again, you'll see it doesn't make that much difference. And I'm going to use this effect later on to try and see, well, can we use that to make a sort of objective standard of how visually clear a particular stimulus is, that's independent from the screen it's shown on and independent from the eyesight ability of the person making the assessment. So now looking on to that, how to assess whether something is easy to see on mobile. So first we're going to try a sort of design exercise here. Sort of set the challenge, and we'll see what happens as a sort of way into looking at how would you actually do this. So imagine you were asked to design a map for a public library that's primarily intended to be easy to see on a typical smartphone for the vast majority of people who might use it while walking around the library, ideally without the need for zooming. So what testing methods would you use during the design process if you were going to have to do that sort of thing? Well, the starting point, everyone's starting point when you design something or create something, is you evaluate it yourself. you're very unlikely as a graphic designer to design something that you yourself can't see. So that kind of baseline threshold gets you up to a certain point, but it by no means covers the actual visionability of the users that you might be designing for. But you got to start somewhere, and generally that's where people start from. But then looking into sort of testing it with users, you've got kind of opportunistic or pop-up testing, sort of opportunistic sample, whoever you can get, or you've got a targeted sample where you're making some degree of effort to actually target people with particular vision conditions or particular levels of vision ability to see, does it work for them. You could ask some vision experts, you could check it against some guidelines, and hopefully after today, you'll be thinking, wow, we should really use Gaussian blurring for this. I'm going to guess that as of current thing, none of the people listening in would have used Gaussian blurring before for this kind of thing. But if you could put in the chat window which of the other ones you might have used, so just type like 1, 2, and 3 or whatever, and that'll be interesting to see of how that looks. Certainly, we can't stress it importantly enough. We absolutely advocate that these things work in combination with each other. It's the Gaussian blurring that helps you better understand the needs of users with visual impairment, that helps you better understand the feedback that you get from them. Or one of our clients said, what the Gaussian blurring does is it allows us to pick up issues before we waste loads of money on user testing to find, the same issues. So before we go on to try that, I'm now going to boldly attempt to have a look at the feedback. Right, I need to get back to Teams, and now I'm going to see, as the delay seems to have caught up with itself, whether I can now let's see, did I get any stars? I got some results for the blurring one. Wow, that's brilliant. So I've got 17 results came in, and by far and away the vast majority, that's actually 70.6. It's gone off the top of my chart because there's so much agreement on row 3, which is absolutely what I would agree with, and a little bit one either side of that. So that is a really, really strong indication that this Gaussian blurring does, swamp. You could on all sorts of different sizes and screen distances. I didn't unfortunately get the results from the original test with the stars in, but the one with the Gaussian blurring, I think if I could get the one with all the rows, you would really see variance all over the place on this graph for that one. I've run this before, and it's everywhere between like 6 and 10. With plenty of everything in between. Okay, so I'm now going to try and go back to the slideshow for our next interactive exercise around testing about whether this map is good enough. So just for the sake of a bit of fun, you can use the QR code reader and go to CED.tools, and just on that initial thing, if you were just to look at this for yourself, or if someone else had designed it and said, hey, can you have a quick look at this for me, tell me what you think of it, are these elements clear enough, is there anything I could do to make this better? I'd like you to focus please on 2 particular bits, one being the sort of standard label text, of which you can, it's a sort of admissions bit in towards the bottom right hand corner on a green background, so that's kind of label text, is it good enough? And also the male and female toilet symbols. They're in various places, but including in the top right-hand corner. So the question is, are those symbols good enough to meet the brief, just preliminary indication, as I set it on the previous slide, for whether this is good enough for the majority of library users being able to see it easily and with certainty without having to pinch and zoom. So again, if you could type your answers into the chat window, like 1 yes, or maybe borderline, and 2 no. I'm not going to try and process those, but I certainly will have a look at them because that will be really, really interesting to see. Okay, let's move on then. So hopefully there were two sort of primary reasons where this sort of process where you just look at it on your own phone are going to sort of fall down in not meeting the brief. One of which is that it was on your own phone, and your phone may be bigger, newer, or better than the typical phone at which the sort of library users might have. And the other is that your eyesight ability may or may not be better or worse than sort of typical library users. So I'm going to take each of those issues in turn. So if we first look at smartphones, this is data based on a 2019 population-based survey with 236 participants. And while we're at it on this survey, we said whatever phone you've got in your pocket right now, please can we measure the screen diagonal of it? And you can see the results that came out, 14 centimeters and 15 centimeters, very much strongly the sort of most popular screen sizes. And in fact, 14 centimeters comes out as being the average. So if you look at what that means in terms of the sort of average sized phone in 2019, iPhone 6 and 7 and 8 are smaller than that at 12 centimeters. iPhone 6 Plus, 7 Plus and 8 Plus, a sort of plus size phone of a few years ago, which is pretty much bang on that average. It also happens to be the Google Pixel 3, which also happens to be my phone. And I think it's a perfect balance between too big and too small. So that's very much matching with being that being an average phone. The newer phones coming out today do tend to be bigger. Your iPhone X and your Galaxy S10, both coming in at sort of 15 centimeters. And then there's even more than that in terms of phablets and even bigger phones. But 14 centimeters is a good place to start. Now, if we look at the kind of vision ability side of things, you take any ability like vision, if you could measure it precisely enough, you would tend to get a bell-shaped curve. People at the top end or the right-hand side on this chart, excellent vision, kind of most likely to end up being fighter pilots. People with very poor vision on the left-hand side, we could be talking blindness, low vision, or any of those things. Now, if you take looking at the bottom end of this curve for people who would need assistive technology, that is a very important area. And I think a lot of the focus of this conference is on that area of, specialist solutions to meet people with particular needs. But if you take a sort of, if I'm honest, typically young, typically male designer who might have a sort of this graphic design task of this library map that I've sort of hypothetically posed, they're typically going to have better than average vision. And they're generally going to design it so that at least they can see it and look at it and go, well, I can see it. I think it's fine. But what does that mean? Well, if they can see it, then anybody who's got better vision than them, they're certainly going to be able to see this library map. And maybe the designer's gone, hey, well, I'll add alt text and I'll make sure that I'm compliant with the accessibility guidelines and so on to make sure that that technology can work with my library map. And then they think, well, I'm kind of done. I can see it. I've done the accessibility features, so we're good. But there's a sort of gap in the middle, highlighted in yellow here, where there's a sort of a large number of people whose vision ability isn't quite as good as this young designer, but not in the area where they'd be using assistive technologies. So this is sort of age-related long-sightedness, quite like to be sort of holding the phone out like this, not your sort of 20 centimeter viewing distance that the designer was capable of achieving. And that's really what my presentation is about, is how can we get these young designers to be able to better empathize with this sort of gap and try and make their designs so that they are usable in their straight up state, without needing so much need for assistive technologies, accepting that does always have a part to play. So if we look at this, what does it mean when we actually measure vision ability then? So there's a survey that we designed, my research group designed. It was conducted in 2010. We got an agency to knock on people's doors, and they gave them this vision test chart that you can see. This is myself on the photo, and looking at this chart. If participants used reading glasses, they wore them for the test, and the participants chose whatever reading distance was comfortable for them, and they identified the smallest row that was comfortable for them to read on this test chart. So when we look at that, what's typically good for near vision ability, here we've got a graph where along the bottom we've got the row number it was that the participant identified as being what was comfortable for them, and the number of the percentage of the sample with that who chose that row going up the side. And we see that very much row 11, which is the second from the bottom, was the kind of most popular choice. Some people did manage to hit row 12, but the average was in fact row 10, which is a sort of 1 millimeter letter height. And we run this, if we were physically at the workshop, I'd be handing you out these vision test charts, because we do it everywhere we go, to see how does the vision ability of the people that I'm talking to in this room compare with the vision ability that's sort of out there if you knock on people's doors. And generally speaking, whenever we go into a professional environment, we find time and time again that the people that we're talking to have considerably better vision ability than the people that you find when you knock on people's doors. And we think this is because people in professional environments have generally been to the optician in the last year, and they generally wear their glasses, if they need them. Whereas when you knock on people's doors, you find people that they ought to have reading glasses, but they haven't got them. Or they use their wife's reading glasses, and actually it makes their vision worse. So you see all sorts of crazy stuff happening when you knock on people's doors. Whereas when you design something in an office and then give it to your colleague who's on the next desk and say, what does this look like? That's really not representative of the variance of vision ability that's out there. So now you can imagine the whole country lined up in order of their vision ability. People at the front, these are the fighter pilots with the excellent vision ability. You're somewhere in the middle, and people at the back are completely blind. So you sit somewhere within that queue. And if you can look at something, if you can see it, everyone in front of you, for sure, they can see it. But everyone that's behind you, you really just don't know. And what we're advocating is that you can use calibrated Gaussian blurring to sort of simulate you blurring the stimulus that it is you're looking at, to simulate moving yourself around that queue. So you can move yourself further backwards, so that you can then stand at a particular percentile in that queue. And this calibrated to a particular target size. So if it's going to be on a mobile device, you can calibrate it to the size of the mobile that you're going to aim to hit and the percentile that you want to get to. So you'd say, right, if this image was shown on a mobile and I was standing at the 85th percentile, if it's visible through this degree of Gaussian blurring, then most likely it's going to be visible for all those people standing in that queue in front of that percentile. So hopefully this will make more sense when we actually give it a go. So here is the calibrated Gaussian blurring applied to the library map that I showed you. And this is sort of check level A. So this is our kind of entry level calibrated version of the check, where really all we're saying is, will these details render on a mobile? Do the details actually exist, or are they so small so that by the time you put them on the mobile, that they're not going to be visible? So I've shown this map at a very large size. Now the exercise that I did right at the start kind of showed you that once you're doing this Gaussian blurring, you can show the image as big as you like. It doesn't really matter anymore. The Gaussian blurring is going to take care of how well that would be visible when you put it on an actual device. So when you look at this Gaussian blurred version of this map, this is a very, very slight degree of blurring that's applied. And generally speaking, everything's pretty much making it. The only thing that's not going to make it is in this facilities in the bottom right-hand corner. You can see the sort of bicycle rack symbol is very, very, very faint. And you can check the version on your actual phone as well. And you can verify that that one really doesn't render properly when it comes to a phone. But that's really just a sort of entry-level check. What you really want moving up to the next level, a slightly more significant degree of blurring. But this one's saying is, can people with an average kind of near vision ability, so let's say 50th percentile, easily see it if they had an iPhone 8 Plus? So this is your kind of your median level person on your median, average size phone. Can they see it? And at least then you're getting somewhere towards saying, well, this is easy to see, if at least half the people can see it on the most popular size device. And then we go another level up. So this is the sort of AAA, or typically a stretch target for things to display on mobiles anyway. And now we're saying, can the majority of people, so that's greater than 70%, easily see it on still the iPhone 8 Plus? So this is now trying to catch the people who say, even if they've got a bit of age-related long-sightedness, or they're not quite wearing the right glasses, will they be able to see it on a phone? Now, obviously, we are talking about mobiles here. So you may say, well, what about the other 30%? Generally speaking, designs like this map would become compromised. You know, if you made everything so big, you'd enter into vertical scrolling or paging, or some other issue would hit, because you're basically designing stuff that's really small. So you would generally have to hit some kind of limit to say, well, we can't make everything enormous to get, you know, 95th or 99th percentile in. We've got to accept that those other people are going to access this content in some other way. It might be via audio, it might be via a tablet, but you can only go so far with a phone. But you can certainly go better than, you know, the A, and certainly, you know, the stretch target is achievable in some cases. But generally, we find AA is the sort of the minimum as to what we would consider to be even talking about this is in the zone of something that's easy to see. So if I now take those elements that I set as the design challenge earlier on in the exercises, and we look at the label text, does it pass this Gaussian blurring test? It's really borderline on that word admissions. By the time you've got the blurring in, it's really touch and go as to whether that's good enough. And if we look at the male and female toilet symbols, I think that's a fail. They're not distinctive enough. The one in the top right hand corner is a male only. There is no female toilet in that. And I think you might struggle to be able to interpret that, you know, with this particular blurring. And therefore, a significant number of people might struggle to interpret that on an actual mobile device. Most importantly, though, could it be any better? So this is a genuine map, which I found off the internet. It's one of the better ones, if I'm honest. But then even taking one of the best practice ones, I then had a bit of a play with it myself. Can I make stuff more visually distinctive so that it's more visible through this blurring? So I've taken the male and female toilet icons and made the man much more significantly different from the woman, with the way the detailing of how the legs and the dress look differently. And now that is looking much better. And if I look at the admissions text, well, I took the green background and made it slightly more pale. I took the text and made it semi-bold. And I also rearranged slightly the shape of the room so that the room is very slightly wider to make room for this exercise text. So with these slight modifications, I have been able to get it now from a sort of fail or borderline to a really clear pass of the Gaussian blurring test. So that's looking at this blurred version. If you now look at it, you know, without the blurring on, hopefully you would agree that that is just clearer. You can understand it faster. It's easier to see, and you can scan the QR code here and have a look at this on your mobile. And again, hopefully you will come to the same conclusion that having gone through that process of blurring it, improving the features so that they're visible through the blur, and then looking at it, how does it look without the blur? You know, you come to a better position, you know, of a better design. So now I'm going to look at usage of this in practice. So this is work we were done commissioned by Unilever, applying Gaussian blurring to e-commerce images. Here is a pack shot of Magnum Minis. These were in e-commerce stores circa 2012 or so. And if you apply the Gaussian blurring to these as they would appear at sort of 16 millimeters thumbnail size within your retailer app, and you said, can I understand what I need to know to know what this product is? Who made it? You can tell it's a Magnum, but how many of them you get and which variants of the Mini you get, you know, what flavors you get, you just can't tell. Unilever worked with us and some design agencies to improve that image to make it visually clearer. And if we now run the Gaussian blurring test on it, it's still clear who made it, but you can now tell that you get 6 of them. You know that it's Mini for sure, and you can see the flavors have been sort of supersized. So you've got a much better chance of knowing what's actually in the pack. This was tested by Unilever in an A/B split test in a retailer. So that's where half the people who come into the retailer get the first image, the pack shot. The other half get the enhanced image. It's run simultaneously on a live with shoppers. And this was in 2017, and there was a 24% uplift from the enhanced imagery, which Unilever were understandably quite delighted with that. This is a quote from Oliver Bradley, who's the global e-commerce design director at Unilever. He says, before any new or updated e-commerce images are sent to retailers, Unilever now requires that these images must pass EDC's level AA calibrated Gaussian blurring test. On a worldwide basis, you can see the sort of Unilever's biggest billion-dollar brands that have taken this and run with it to improve their e-commerce images. And Ollie let us know that this test, this AA Gaussian blurring test, has now been applied to at least 20,000 of their product images distributed in over 13 countries. So we've developed a tool to kind of help the assistant of making this actually happen. We've called it Clarify, and it applies calibrated Gaussian blurring to e-commerce images and mobile screenshots. You can get to it from cedc.tools, of which I put the QR code up there. And we've just yesterday added a live demo feature to this, which I've got a few minutes left, so I'm just going to have a quick go at it. So if I flip onto my browser and flip onto the Clarify website, I can go here, I can select a file, and somewhat cheekily, listening to the BBC font talk earlier, I went on to BBC Sport and I pulled the screenshot off of BBC Sport to have a look at their new font. So this is a large size in perfect clarity, and this is their new font with the Gaussian blurring in, and this is at the level AA, and I'm sure they'll be delighted to see that all of the details are still coming through perfectly well. So you can see all the the 4 hours and the author and all these things. Obviously the headline is going to be okay, but even here the text against the grey background, it's all working reasonably well at level AA. So that's how fast it can be done. We've made this tool available. It will be freely available for the level AA check. We do also have a sort of paid for version, which is in PowerPoint, which you can download here, and it does all the different levels, and it does, it allows you to load and save and these sorts of things. But this, we've also made this free version to kind of help get the message out there. So it's a sort of open question now. What could this be used for? I'm very keen to follow up with people in discussions as to where we could go with this. I'd like to see it being used for mobile phone icons, websites, digital interfaces, apps. We could even do it on people's conference presentations as to whether their slides are going to be visible. I had a quick one with the NHS Test and Trace app, pushing the screenshot through. For that one, I think you'd really have to say it ought to pass the AAA level. And so this blurring is at the AAA level. And you can see the venue check-in, that QR code is really not performing very well. It should be bigger. The purple is a bit too dark. I think that immediately looking at that, you're like, yeah, that needs to be improved. It should be improved. I can't see any reason why that venue check-in icon couldn't be bigger and the background could be paler, and it would overall just be better. So that was quite interesting. I just did that today before this presentation. So questions and comments. To find out more, please go to cedc.tools. It's sort of the landing page for all of our tools, and QR code is there. Please contact me, especially if you're interested in talking about Gaussian blurring for setting an objective standard for visual clarity or accessibility of mobile phone icons. And the form at the bottom of cedc.tools can be used to subscribe to our bulletin. And I'm now going to flip back to the chat so I can have a look at what people have been posting. That goes in the browser. But I'll say thank you to everyone for listening.